Most people think an avoidant's greatest fear is intimacy. It isn't. Their greatest fear is being controlled. Every time you chase an avoidant, every time you send that long text, express your frustration, or demand emotional clarity, you are running a playbook they have mastered since childhood. You are confirming their core belief. People are unsafe. People demand too much, and distance is my only shield. You think you're fighting for the relationship. They think they're surviving you. And as long as you keep playing that role, they remain entirely in control of the dynamic. They push. You pull. They pull away further. You reach harder. It's a predictable script, and every single move you make gives them predictable power. But there is one specific type of empath who breaks this script entirely. This isn't the hyper-giving, self-sacrificing empath who burns themselves out trying to fix people. This isn't the empath who cries, pleads, or tries to explain their feelings for the 100th time. This is the dark empath, the individual who possesses hyper-attuned emotional intelligence, but pairs it with absolute behavioral restraint and psychological precision. When an avoidant encounters this type of person, their entire defensive architecture collapses. Why? Because the dark empath does something no one else has ever done. They do not react. They do not chase. They do not get disoriented by distance. Instead, they read the avoidant's subconscious cues in real time, mirror their exact behavior back to them without a drop of anger, and instantly strip away the avoidant's sense of control. In the next few minutes, we are going to break down the exact psychological mechanics of why this happens. I'm going to show you the subtle micro-behaviors that make an avoidant go from detached and cold to suddenly anxious, hyper-aware, and desperate for your validation. You'll learn why standard empathy fails with avoidance, the exact shift in posture and vocal pitch that flips the power dynamic instantly, and how to execute this level of behavioral mastery without losing your integrity or playing childish games. If you have ever felt powerless in a relationship with someone who pulls away the moment you get close, pay very close attention to what we covered today. By the end of this video, you will never view emotional distance the same way again, and you'll hold the precise blueprint to turn their push-pull dynamic upside down. Right now, in human behavior, there is a fundamental law. Whoever needs the other person less holds the power in the interaction. Avoidants know this intuitively. They have spent their entire lives perfecting the art of emotional distance as an instrument of control. They withdraw, and you spiral. They go silent, and your heart rate spikes. They make you feel like your normal human needs are unreasonable, neurotic, or overwhelming. Stop doing what you're doing. If you continue to respond to an avoidant with classic emotional appeals, you are actively training them to disrespect your boundaries. You are handing them the remote control to your nervous system. But today, we are stopping the cycle. We are going to analyze the one specific profile that completely neutralizes avoidant behavior, the shadow empath. If you stay with me through the end of this breakdown, you will understand the precise neurological triggers that make an avoidant flip from completely detached to deeply preoccupied with you. I am going to reveal the 3 micro-behavioral adjustments you can make today, adjustments in your body language, your response timing, and your vocal tonality that strip an avoidant of their emotional leverage without you ever having to raise your voice or send a single heated text. If you leave this video early, you will continue using strategies that actively feed their defense mechanisms. If you stay, you learn how the human mind actually processes distance, power, and perception. An avoidant attachment style is not a mystery. It is a rigid defense mechanism disguised as independence. When an avoidant pulls away, they are expecting one of 2 responses from you: aggression or desperation. If you attack, they validate their belief that people are dangerous. If you chase, they validate their belief that they are superior and in control. Both outcomes allow them to keep their psychological armor intact. The average empath fails here because their instinct is to heal, fix, and over-explain. They flood the avoidant with emotion, which acts like gasoline on an avoidant's need to retreat. The shadow empath operates on a completely different psychological wavelength. They possess the same deep sensitivity to emotional frequency as any empath, but it is paired with ruthless self-regulation and strategic observation. When an avoidant pulls back, the shadow empath does not panic. They do not attempt to fill the silence. They observe. They process the avoidant's detachment not as a personal rejection, but as actionable behavioral data. They realize instantly, this person is attempting to regulate their internal anxiety by creating external distance. Here is where the dynamic shifts violently. When the avoidant pulls away, the shadow empath mirrors the distance, not out of spite, passive aggression, or drama, but with total, calm indifference. Vocal tonality. If the avoidant speaks in flat, low-investment tones, the shadow empath matches that baseline. No upward inflection at the end of sentences. No seeking approval. Micro-expressions. No visible micro-expressions of anxiety, disappointment, or tension. The face remains neutral, open, and entirely unbothered. Spatial dynamics. The shadow empath yields space effortless. If the avoidant steps back, the shadow empath doesn't step forward to close the gap. They stand firm. To the avoidant mind, this is terrifying. Their entire defense structure relies on the assumption that you are anchored to them, waiting and anxious. When they realize that their distance produces zero emotional disruption in you, their brain experiences a massive shock of unpredictable feedback. The sudden absence of your anxiety creates a vacuum. The avoidant expected you to pursue. Instead, they are met with a wall of calm, perceptive composure. For the first time, the avoidant is forced to sit in the silence they created. They no longer have your nervous energy to focus on, which means they are left alone with their own suppressed emotions. The brain cannot maintain an avoidant defense strategy when the other person refuses to play the role of the pursuer. The balance of power flips instantaneously. The avoidant begins to check their phone, replay conversations, and analyze your behavior. The pursuer dynamic is reversed without you ever asking for a single thing. You do not need to fight for someone's attention. You do not need to write paragraph texts explaining your worth to someone who is actively committed to misunderstanding you. True psychological power isn't about manipulation. It is about absolute authority over your own nervous system. The moment you master your responses, read the underlying human mechanics at play, and hold your ground with quiet, unshakable poise, the game changes forever. Stop chasing the people who run from you. Start observing them. The moment you see their distance for the defense mechanism it really is, you stop being their prey, and you become the absolute center of control in the room. Most people misinterpret an avoidant's emotional distance as a sign of supreme confidence, stoicism, or absolute independence. When an avoidant pulls back, goes silent, or responds with cold, transactional brevity, it gives off the illusion that they hold all the cards and are entirely comfortable in their detachment. But this is a complete psychological illusion. Avoidants do not construct emotional walls because they are strong. They construct them because their internal system is remarkably fragile and deeply terrified of losing control. From an early stage of development, the avoidant learned a specific behavioral lesson. Vulnerability leads to engulfment. Expectations lead to failure. And emotional intimacy is a trap where someone else eventually takes the wheel. To adapt to this underlying fear, their subconscious built a sophisticated defensive architecture designed to keep everyone at a manageable distance. The mechanism works through artificial control. By being the one who decides when to pull away when to go quiet, and how far anyone is allowed to get, the avoidant maintains the upper hand in every relationship dynamic. They create an environment where you are constantly adapting to their comfort level, while they adapt to nothing. When you feel that sudden shift in temperature, the abrupt drop in warmth, the delayed text messages, the subtle emotional withdrawal after a moment of closeness, what you are witnessing is not strength. It is an automated protective protocol. Their brain interprets closeness as a threat to their autonomy, and so it deploys distance to reestablish safety and dominance over the interaction. The fatal flaw in how most people handle this dynamic lies in their instinctual reaction. When a standard partner feels the avoidant pull away, their immediate impulse is to close the gap. They try to fix it, ask what's wrong, demand clear communication, or flood the avoidant with reassurance and emotion. What they fail to realize is that every single one of these desperate attempts to reconnect actually solidifies the avoidant's defensive strategy. When you chase, you validate their belief that people are demanding, overwhelming, and unsafe. More importantly, when you express anxiety, frustration, or panic over their distance, you confirm to them that their retreat has successfully disrupted your emotional state. You prove to them that they are the center of gravity in the relationship and that their distance dictates your reality. This creates a self-reinforcing loop where the avoidant feels entirely justified in their walls. They see your emotional distress as proof that you are needy or chaotic, which gives them a sense of moral and psychological superiority. They retreat further into their fortress, comfortable in the knowledge that you are outside, knocking on the door, waiting for them to let you in. They remain completely in control of the emotional pace, the boundaries, and the narrative. As long as you keep fighting against those walls, trying to reason with them, emotionalize at them, or break them down by force, you are playing directly into the exact script their defense mechanism was built to handle. You are attempting to fight a fortress with raw emotion, and every wave of feeling you throw at those stone walls only makes the fortress stronger, leaving you exhausted, disoriented, and entirely powerless. When an avoidant encounters a standard partner who chases, pleads, or demands emotional transparency, their internal narrative is validated. They remain the controlled, rational anchor, while the other person is the erratic pursuer. But everything shifts the moment they cross paths with the Shadow Empath. This specific archetype possesses the same heightened emotional bandwidth and hyper-attuned perceptive abilities as any traditional empath, but it is paired with absolute emotional self-sovereignty, behavioral restraint, and cold psychological clarity. The Shadow Empath does not view an avoidant's sudden distance as a personal rejection, an emergency to fix, or a crisis that requires emotional over-explanation. Instead, they process that distance purely as behavioral data, a clear signal that the avoidant is attempting to manipulate the emotional temperature of the room to regain a sense of safety and control. Rather than fighting that distance, trying to breach the wall, or demanding an explanation, the Shadow Empath deploys the cold mirror dynamic. They do not react with visible anger, subtle passive aggression, or theatrical drama, because any of those reactions would still signal to the avoidant that their withdrawal successfully impacted the other person's nervous system. Instead, the Shadow Empath absorbs the shift in real time, adjusts their own energy instantly, and reflects that exact same cold, calm detachment right back at the avoidant with absolute, surgical precision. If the avoidant lowers their investment, the Shadow Empath matches that baseline instantly, without a single flinch. If the avoidant takes 3 hours to respond to a message, the Shadow Empath does not sit by the phone waiting. They match the rhythm effortless, completely unbothered, moving on with their life as if nothing of significance occurred. This precise reflection produces an immediate and severe sense of psychological disorientation within the avoidant's subconscious. An avoidant's entire emotional strategy relies on predictability. They pull away, expecting you to step forward, which allows them to feel pursued, safe, and superior. But when they pull away and step into a vacuum of total neutral composure, their brain experiences a critical feedback error. The shadow empath does not fight the avoidance distance. They step backward into the dark with them, completely comfortable in the quiet, completely steady in their posture, and entirely unreadable. There is no warmth to exploit, no anxiety to feed on, and no emotional pursuit to run from. The avoidant suddenly finds themselves staring into a completely flat, unflappable mirror that reflects their own coldness back onto them, exposing the inherent absurdity of their defensive maneuvers. What makes this dynamic so devastating to the avoidant's internal structure is the total absence of malice or theatrics. If you mirror an avoidant out of bitterness, they can sense the hidden resentment and use it to justify staying detached. But when the shadow empath mirrors them, it is executed with total serenity, low vocal inflection, neutral facial expressions, and unshakable bodily composure. The avoidant realizes that their retreat did not provoke panic or trigger a pursuit. It simply caused the shadow empath to disengage their focus and redirect their attention elsewhere. The emotional anchor the avoidant assumed they had locked in place has suddenly vanished into thin air. By effortlessly reflecting the avoidant's coldness without offering a single drop of emotional leverage, the shadow empath systematically strips the avoidant of their sense of control, leaving them trapped in the very isolation they created, stripped of the power dynamic they relied on to feel safe. The true battleground in any high-stakes interpersonal dynamic does not take place in the words spoken, but in the subtle micro-behavioral signals transmitted beneath conscious awareness. Avoidants are hyper-vigilant observers of emotional shifts. Because their defense systems were forged in environments where emotional demands felt overwhelming, their nervous systems are constantly scanning for micro-threats: a tightening jaw, an elevated vocal pitch, an anxious glance, or a desperate shift in posture. When a standard partner feels an avoidant pull away, their body involuntarily betrays their panic. Their vocal pitch rises, their speech tempo accelerates, their eyelids widen in search of reassurance, and their physical posture leans forward in an attempt to bridge the physical and emotional gap. The avoidance subconscious reads these micro cues instantly, registers them as an attempt at emotional capture, and triggers an even harder retreat. The shadow empath, however, understands that master-level control over an interaction requires total authority over one's own nonverbal architecture. They do not attempt to convince the avoidant with words or logical arguments. They systematically dismantle the avoidant's defenses by controlling the microscopic physical variables that govern human perception. The first critical shift occurs in vocal tonality. When communicating with an emotionally distant individual, the shadow empath drops their vocal pitch into a low, resonant, flat baseline. They eliminate downward-seeking inflections and upward question-like tones at the end of sentences. Their cadence becomes measured, unhurried, and deliberate. There is no frantic rush to fill pauses or explain themselves. By projecting complete vocal stillness, they send a direct signal to the avoidant's primitive brain that there is zero internal distress, zero urgency, and zero demand being made. The second micro-behavioral shift lies in eye contact and facial muscle regulation. Most people who feel rejected either aggressively lock eyes to demand attention or anxiously avert their gaze out of shame and discomfort. The shadow empath does neither. They utilize a relaxed, soft-focus gaze paired with complete facial neutrality. The subtle micro-expressions around the eyes and mouth, the micro-furrowing of the brow, the slight tension in the lips, the rapid blinking that betrays internal anxiety are completely silenced. When the avoidant drops a cold remark or pulls back into silence, the shadow empath's face remains an unreadable canvas of quiet composure. There is no flash of hurt, no micro-flare of indignation, and no subtle visual bid for connection. Finally, spatial dynamics and posture complete the behavioral trap. Instead of leaning in, shifting uncomfortably, or fidgeting with objects to displace nervous energy, the shadow empath grounds their physical frame. Their shoulders drop, their breathing deepens into the diaphragm, and their body occupies space with complete, effortless calm. If the avoidant takes a physical or psychological step back, the shadow empath yields that space without resistance, remaining completely immobile. They do not cross their arms defensively, nor do they reach out to re-establish physical proximity. This absolute absence of physical threat or pursuit bypasses the avoidant's internal alarm systems entirely. Because there are no incoming emotional demands to fight off, the avoidant's primary defensive protocol becomes completely useless, leaving their subconscious disarmed by a quiet, unshakable presence that refuses to trigger their alarm response. The power inversion switch occurs at the precise moment an avoidant subconscious realizes that their primary psychological weapon, emotional withdrawal, has lost its ability to create anxiety, urgency, or pursuit in the other person. Throughout their life, the avoidant has relied on a predictable power dynamic. They pull away, and the other person spirals, overcommunicates, or tries to fix the connection. This predictable reaction gives the avoidant an immediate sense of emotional safety and control. It allows them to set the boundaries, dictate the pace of the relationship, and remain comfortably insulated from true vulnerability, all while holding the implicit threat of total abandonment over the partner's head. When the shadow empath flips the switch, that entire dynamic collapses in an instant. The avoidant pulls back into their usual retreat, expecting the familiar sequence of desperate texts, tense conversations, or anxious bids for attention. But this time, nothing happens. The space they created remains completely quiet, calm, and empty. There is no frantic checking in, no passive-aggressive social media posts, and no visible emotional distress. The shadow empath simply absorbs the distance, matches the energy, and continues moving forward with their own life, completely unbothered by the sudden drop in communication. This unexpected vacuum triggers an immediate psychological shift within the avoidant. For the first time in the dynamic, the avoidant is stripped of the passive pursuit that usually reassures them that they are still desired and in control. Without the other person's anxious energy to push against, the avoidant is left entirely alone with the silence they manufactured. Their brain, which was prepared to defend against an invasion of intimacy, now finds itself defending against absolute irrelevance. The subconscious narrative flips from, "I am withholding my presence to keep myself safe," to, "My presence was withdrawn, and they didn't even notice or care." This realization disrupts the avoidant's internal equilibrium. The perceived power balance, which was previously tilted entirely in their favor, reverses instantly. The avoidant, who previously felt superior and in control, suddenly experiences a sharp wave of unexpected anxiety. They begin to obsessively retrace the interaction, searching for clues as to why their detachment failed to produce the usual result. They wonder if the shadow empath has lost interest, found someone else, or simply seen right through their act. The detachment that was meant to make the avoidant feel safe now makes them feel isolated and insecure. As this internal tension builds, the avoidant's primitive mind attempts to resolve the uncertainty. The person who was once retreating is now compelled to step forward just to test the waters and regain their sense of control. They send a casual text, drop a low-investment comment, or find a trivial reason to reinitiate contact. But because the shadow empath does not break composure or celebrate this return with sudden emotional excitement, the power balance remains permanently flipped. The avoidant realizes that their emotional distance no longer functions as a lever of control, forcing them to reevaluate the entire relationship dynamic from a position of unexpected vulnerability. Mastery over emotional reaction is the ultimate catalyst that forces an avoidant to confront the very core of their psychological architecture, their suppressed fear of abandonment. Avoidant attachment is, at its root, a proactive defense strategy against being discarded or overwhelmed. By abandoning the emotional connection first, by retreating before things get too intense, the avoidant creates a preemptive strike that protects their ego from the threat of rejection. They hide behind a facade of complete self-sufficiency, convincing themselves that they do not need anyone, while simultaneously provoking their partner into proving how much they care through anxious pursuit. When the shadow empath responds to an avoidance retreat with total non-reactivity, they refuse to participate in this subconscious theater. This non-reactivity is not a performance of silent treatment or bitter detachment. It is a profound, grounded state of psychological composure that stems from true self-sovereignty. The shadow empath remains hyper-perceptive, fully aware of every subtle shift in the avoidance posture, tone, and timing. Yet they choose not to absorb or react to any of it. They process the avoidance coldness as a manifestation of the avoidance internal conflict, rather than a reflection of their own value. Because the shadow empath offers neither fight nor flight, the avoidance usual defense mechanism hits a dead end. In standard dynamics, the partner's emotional reaction acts as a distraction, allowing the avoidant to focus entirely on the partner's demanding or irrational behavior, rather than their own internal wounds. But when faced with an unshakable, non-reactive presence, the avoidant loses that external scapegoat. The mirror held up by the shadow empath is crystal clear, reflecting the avoidant's own isolation back onto them, without any added noise, chaos, or emotional pollution. Stripped of external conflict, the avoidant's mind is forced inward. The silence they constructed to feel safe suddenly becomes a pressure chamber. Without the partner's desperate reaching to reassure them of their worth, the avoidant is left alone with the raw, terrifying reality that their actions have real consequences, that their distance can actually cause people to walk away entirely. The deeply buried core fear of abandonment, which the avoidant spent a lifetime repressing under layers of detachment and cold indifference, suddenly bubbles to the surface of their conscious mind. This psychological breakthrough exposes the paradox of avoidant attachment. The very behavior they use to protect themselves from abandonment ultimately creates the exact isolation they fear most. The avoidant realizes that their detachment did not make them look powerful or untouchable. It simply made them irrelevant to someone who knows their own worth. By maintaining absolute mastery over reaction while staying deeply perceptive,